Battle Sheep, a game for 2 to 4 players, ages 7 to adult. Actually, the game is so simple, the rules are so basic that I've been able to play it with my 4.5-year-old daughter, even though I'm not sure that this is a game that you should play as described in the rules with a 4-year-old or with a 5-year-old, for reasons that I will explain later. In this game, players control herds of sheep that are trying to control greener pastures, to control as many areas on the board as possible. The game plays for 2 to 4 players. Each player takes a herd of sheep of a different color, and each sheep has a different illustration. It's a lot of variety even within the same group of sheep, and the illustrations are really adorable. These are very durable, very sturdy tokens. It's plastic tokens, so they can stand a lot of love from a child. So each player will select a herd of sheep, and then each player also gets 4 of these terrain tiles. The players will place the terrain tiles on the table any way they want. So each player contributes to create the board, and that also means that from game to game you can experiment with different configurations. Even though overall probably the board will look more or less the same, still good to have that option. Once the board is ready, you grab all of your tokens and you place them in a single column on one edge of the board. Like this, for example, for one player, and like this for another player. Yes, these piles are a little unstable at the beginning. Sometimes I make them fall. My 4.5-year-old daughter, it seems to be much better on not messing with the piles. The game is simplicity itself. When it is your turn, you have to move one of your piles of sheep. That means you choose one and you divide it into 2. And they can be of any size. It can be half and half, it can be a single one leaving, it can be a single one behind, and anything in between. But you need to leave one behind. So every time that you move sheep, one sheep has to move, and your initial pile will grow smaller. Piles of sheep move in a straight line. And they move until they reach an edge of the board or until they reach another sheep. And when they do so, they stop. So for example, if I were to move these sheep here, they would go here and they would continue until they get there. Then suppose I'm this other player and I decide to move these sheep here. Then maybe I want to move these other 2 guys here. And then as this player, I want to move these guys here. Now this player, as you can see now, these sheep stop here because there's a sheep here. These are the sheep cannot go here. If I want to move them, I could move them this way, or I could move them this way. Sheep cannot enter an area where there are other sheep. They can only leave such areas. So they cannot enter, they cannot jump over. So they pretty much get in each other's way. The game is, as I said, very simple. What happens is simply that players keep playing like this, activating their sheep to split into smaller piles until we'll get to a point where no sheep will be able to move anymore. And when that happens, you look at the situation on the board. Look, the game is so simple. I'm going to play a mini game here, a mini solo game. Which is really not very good in terms of strategy. I made some major mistakes here that not even my 4.5-year-old daughter would make, but it was in the heat of explaining the game. As you can see, this big pile of white sheep got stuck in there. How did that happen? Well, when one of the players doesn't have any sheep that can move anymore, because either you have stacks that are stuck around, surrounded by sheep and by edges, or you have individual sheep and individual sheep cannot move. Once it got to a point where no sheep can move anymore, like you would have in this case, so this game really didn't take long, at that point you count points. And you get a point for each pasture, that is for each hex that you control. So that means that the more you have been able to spread out your sheep, the more hexes you occupy, the better you're doing. At the end of the game, the player that occupied the most pasture hexes is the winner of the game. In case of a tie, the player with the largest single herd of sheep is the winner. For example, here we have a single group. This would be the group that would be counted for the white player if there was a tie. I don't even know if there is one. I'm not going to count right now. This is the game. It's this simple. It's a cute game. It's a cute game that my little daughter really enjoyed. The 2.5-year-old is too young to play it because she can really. We tried, but she can't figure out what a straight line is. It's understandable. I also didn't know that kind of stuff back in the day. But my 4-year-old really likes it. Likes the fact that the game is so fast that she doesn't have to worry about many options. She has practiced moving things in a straight line along a line of axes. That's a valuable skill to have as a young gamer. The components are so attractive, are so adorable that that's a big plus for her. For adult gamers, that may not be so important, but for a young gamer, a game that looks good, that looks funny, that has these adorable illustrations, that is a huge plus. And these components are just fun to manipulate, just very pleasant. The game plays fast and it has a lot of cool moves. And my daughter, my 4.5-year-old daughter, really likes it. So why did I say you shouldn't play it with the 4.5-year-old as described by the rules? Because if you play the rules, a very young child can understand. The spirit of the game is emotionally hard for a young child to really grasp and accept. The point is that you're trying to block the opponent. You're trying to close off large areas of the board so that you only can then spread around that area. You're trying to get large stacks of the opponent completely blocked so that then the opponent cannot use them and get stuck. And that a young child really does not like very much. So we're playing it more like, let's have fun and work together to figure out a way of spreading out. So the rules are graspable, the spirit of the game is pretty aggressive. Don't be fooled by these cute sheep. These cute sheep can be mean. They don't mind sheep of the other herd dying of starvation as long as sheep in their own herd have a lot of pasture, actually even more pasture than they need. But that's the spirit of the game. You're trying to deny pastures to the opponent. So you can play it with a young child, just you'll have to be kind and to play it as a semi-co-op, almost like an abstract puzzle. Let's see if we can manage to place all of the sheep in all the hexes to spread them perfectly out. Oh, maybe we didn't, we couldn't do it. One hex has remained unoccupied at the end of the game. So you can play it almost as a semi-co-op puzzle, or just don't play it too aggressively. And a 4-year-old will like it. At least my daughter really enjoyed it. Played the way that I said. Played in the spirit of the game. I think this is a light abstract game that can appeal to adults. Again, to adults that do not mind a pretty aggressive game. This is all a game about whatever I do that is good for me because it's bad for you. Everything is relative. Gaining a good position means denying a position to the opponent. It means to take resources from the opponent, to take possibilities from the opponent. And believe it or not, in a game this simple, there are some pretty interesting decisions to make. Early on in the game, you have these large stacks, and that is so cool that you have them. But if you leave large stacks around, then you're increasing the chances that the opponent will block you, and you may get stuck behind enemy lines. Like not in this case, but for example, in this case. this large pile here is doomed. Most of these sheep will not get their own pastures. So when you have large piles, you have possibilities, but you also have to be very careful, because if the opponent does manage to corner you in an area of the board, to corner a large group of sheep in an area of the board, that will give you a lot of damage and will give you some heartburn. Again, this is a game that, don't be fooled by the cuteness of the components. I think if played by adults, if played by the rules and the spirit of the game, this is a game that can be pretty mean. As abstract games sometimes can. It is not just war games that have blood involved in the story that develops here. So, Battleship is a game that overall I find pretty enjoyable. I find it enjoyable as an abstract game to play with adults. I find it very enjoyable to play with my little daughter, even though we don't play it right, but at least we know that. But it's a game that I like, in which I like the fact that the game does double as an effective game for adults, as a light entertainment, as a quick filler, but at the same time also can be a good game for children if you know how to play. Battleship by Blue Orange, pretty good product to me. The rules are very clear, also with rules such simple is hard to mess. The components are adorable, the mechanics are clean, and yet they still have some interesting decisions to them. So overall, positive impression from me.